during COVID, I had a shipment that was stored in Singapore for much longer than it had to be because his visa was up in the air because he was moving from Singapore to Japan, and that process was taking way longer than it was supposed to. So we couldn't ship out his stuff without his visa being approved. Right, stuff's at sea, and they don't have a visa, and then it comes into port and they still don't have a visa. We can't like just turn it around. you know?
Yeah.
So then we'll have to figure out things from there. So anyway, this customer shipment, when it came to Japan, he had furniture and stuff, and a lot of the stuff had mold on it because it was in Singapore storage for a long time, and then eventually it was at sea, and I think it arrived in Japan in the summertime. Um, but his company didn't pay for air conditioned storage. Air conditioned storage is an option, and air conditioned storage can really mitigate the risk of at
Yeah.
least the mold and mildew spreading. Um, so anyway, so a lot of this stuff was moldy, and nobody likes that. So he did that was escalated. And I had another shipper who had a very nice couch which was moldy. Um, that can be cleaned, right? But generally, once you have mold in there, the can be in there forever, right?
Welcome back to the Moving to Japan podcast. I'm your host, Ziv Nakajima again. And if you're new here, this podcast is dedicated to all of you out there who are either in the process of or thinking about relocating to the land of the rising sun, as well as for those among you who are in the business of relocating others to Japan. So HR managers, global mobility managers, business owners whose business or part of their business is to help employees and their families move to, work, and settle here. Whether you're coming here or relocating employees here for a short period of time or as far as the eye can see, this podcast is for you. We're going to be talking about everything from the move itself to daily life, culture and language barriers and nuances, the logistics of it all, and much more. Pick the brain of various industry leaders and experts in their field all around this topic of moving to Japan. All right, good to be back with you folks, and apologies for the very low frequency in posting these recordings. We've been super busy here at Nippon Bridge, as well as at my other company, Nippon Tradings International. I'm helping you good people relocate to Japan, register your cars to drive here, find places to live, schools for the kids, you name it. And we've also been attending and organizing quite a few events, from a real estate summit in Tokyo to a Halloween party in Fukuoka. So yeah, happily busy, but that's no excuse. I should and will try to post some more episodes here on a more regular basis. Bear with me, please. So, for today's conversation, I've recently had the pleasure of speaking with Jeremy Laughlin, VP of Sales at Momentum, and they're a global relocation company that specializes in shipping, which was naturally what I wanted to pick his brain about the most. So, we talked about relocations generally, of course, and mainly from the corporate aspect. How should HR managers prepare for a successful relocation project, especially if they've never handled one before? We talked about the effects of COVID, the war in Ukraine, and Middle East related issues on the shipping and relocation support services overall, the differences between handling inbound and outbound relocations to and from Japan, which his company does on a regular basis, and really what are the main differences between individual and corporate relocations. We also discussed the costs of shipping, how those are calculated, and why budgeting correctly is so important. Tax implications for companies relocating and employing expats to or in other countries. And of course, we wouldn't be the Life in Japan podcast if we didn't also discuss the particular angle of working with Japanese service providers, like moving, packing, furniture assembly specialists. We heard some examples of what can go wrong with international shipping and relocation procedures, and some advice on what to take and not to take with you when you are relocating to a different country. We talk mold, moisture, the bane of storage and shipping providers and their clientele, how the location and type of property that you're moving into affect the cost of shipping and moving overall. and really what's the importance of having a relocation advisor, someone who adopts an individual and unique approach to every client and their needs. So a really eye-opening conversation and look under the hood of the global relocation and shipping industry. Hope you enjoyed the conversation, and I'll see you again on the other side. All right. Cool. So thank you very much for making the time to talk to me. I've been actually looking forward to this one because we keep talking about relocation support services, and we do provide relocation support services at Nippon Bridge, but we're very much spring chickens in that regard. We've only been at it for 2.5 years or what, and we're still in the process of, massaging our services to suit a B2B kind of environment as opposed to just helping families and singles and couples when they relocate. So it's a really good opportunity for me to pick the brain of the experts, so to speak, and you're it. So welcome to the Nippon Bridge Life and Business in Japan podcast.
Well, thank you very much for having me, sir. You could say that spring chickens are my specialty.
Are they?
Because you find a lot of spring chickens when it comes to relocation. That goes both on the client side and also on the HR side as well, right? So very happy to have you pick my brain. So I'm sure you have a lot of questions. So
I do. But for our listeners who don't know you, and I even myself only know you a little bit, can you give us a little bit of a background of how you ended up in this industry, what sort of positions you've held so far, what you're doing now, just like a comic book issue #1 kind of backstory?
Yeah, so that would be a pretty long issue, but I'm very, very happy to give you the the abridged version of that, right? So I've been in Japan for relatively a long time. I've been here for 17 years now. I did not start out doing relocation. I came first when I was in university, and I was always a Japanophile. Not really because of like anime or manga and stuff like that. I was very much into the traditional culture of Japan. But I had Japanese friends in university, so that was part of it. So after I graduated university, I decided to come back to Japan, and that was back in 2008. So I've been living here since 2008. Um, I did a lot of jobs before I did relocation. Um, they're not directly related, but doing a lot of jobs in Japan gives you a good understanding of the country and the culture and a lot of things, a lot of things that you could take with you into relocation and advising any customer who's relocating to Japan. So no, I started in relocation in 2018. And that was through somebody in my network who used to work for one of the well-known relocation companies, and he recommended the job for me. And after a series of interviews, I think I had about 5 interviews. The company decided to hire me. So,
and then what was your starting position? Like how did you enter the industry for the first time?
I started off in business development, and I did that for about 2 years, up until about 2 years, right up until COVID hit, and that turned things around quite dramatically. So instead of doing a lot of sales related activities, I found myself doing more of operational things, because let's just say that business development was not as big of a priority.
Well, not many people relocating during COVID, really.
No, it was actually, it put our company into, our company's existence into question, right? The only way that we were able to survive was helping people repatriate, because that was mostly the only option for people.
There was a bit of a trend during COVID, wasn't it? People who kind of decided to just pack things up and go back home.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there was a lot of uncertainty. So in that situation, sometimes the best place to go is home, right?
Yeah, in Japan, at least at the start of the pandemic, Japan was not really accommodating to foreigners. Even permanent resident foreigners were, unsure if they'll be able to get back in the country if they leave, and didn't really know where their future stands with Japan. So I can definitely see that happening.
Yeah, it really caused a lot of chaos for people, and to a certain extent, the our relocation consultants came into play because a lot of people weren't up to date with the latest trends, right, during
Mhm.
COVID.
Okay, so you entered maybe give us a few words about the company. Can you mention the name of the company you're working for?
I mean, it's on my LinkedIn profile, yeah. So I
Yeah.
mean, it's Santa Fe Relocation was the company that I work for.
Are they Japan based? Are they more
It's
global?
global. It's global, and it's the management is based out of Europe right now. So to my latest knowledge, France and Scandinavia.
Okay. And you work for the Japanese branch, meaning you're handling
Correct.
inbound relocations into Japan.
Both inbound and outbound, actually.
Okay, so you also handle Japanese staffers who go to work overseas.
Correct, correct. Well, we handled both foreign nationals who came to Japan and eventually were transferred somewhere else, and we also handled a lot of Japanese employees who were transferred outside of Japan.
Right. So would do you work in an account manager capacity, meaning a company hires your services and then wherever in the world they're relocating to and from, they would use your company?
Yeah, pretty basically, yes. It would be. It's not necessarily anywhere in the world, but for example, a lot of the contracts were covering multiple locations. So maybe between, for example, Japan and Europe, we would have the contract,
Right.
and the client would basically, um, as a standard, have to come to Santa Fe to do the relocation in Japan services, right?
Right.
But for example, the United States may have been completely under a different umbrella or under a different service provider.
Right.
So it was a very mixed bag. But basically, what you said, the answer is yes.
Okay. And then I'm assuming the company operates on more of a B2B capacity. You're not being contacted by a family of three who want to relocate and need help, right?
Are you talking about my current company or my previous company?
Oh, sorry, that's right. Well, both.
Because I don't work for Santa Fe anymore.
Okay.
Um, so anyway, that's a very good question. And in my previous company, a lot of the inquiries were corporate inquiries, right? Um, far more than consumer. Right now, it's kind of the other way around, but we do also have companies, HR representatives who come to us as well.
Right. Okay. So without getting into too much detail on the difference between the two companies and positions and what you went into, why you switched or whatnot, what in your experience now that you've done it for a good few years, what's involved, I guess, first globally, what's involved in a relocation procedure? Let's say for a company that wants to relocate staff, they've never done it before, they don't have any global mobility officers in-house, they have no idea what's involved in relocating staffers to a new country.
So the first piece of the puzzle is to understand the budget requirements, and how much money is going to be going into facilitating the relocation process, right? Because it is a very big investment, um, especially if, for example, it's somebody quite senior who's going, and if they're going with their families, and of course the family might include the dog as well. So the first exercise would be to understand the cost, and um, I would say even before you understand the moving costs of the shipping the goods or the the relo and the other peripheral the services on the periphery would be to understand the tax considerations as well,
Okay.
because taxes you might be paying the same amount in taxes as you are for the salary if they're doing like if they're getting taxed in the host country as well as the home country.
Oh,
So
how do you mean? Sorry, you might be taxed as much as your salary.
no, yes, the taxes for having an expat package can be very significant. Let's just say that.
You're referring to the company paying their own corporate tax every year.
Yeah, I mean it's the payroll, right? It's the payroll, and in some situations the client the shipper might be receiving more than one payroll. Um, the money that they receive in the host country is going to be taxed. But they're expats, right? Then they might not be employees of the Japan entity, right?
Right.
So that's something to consider. Yeah.
I see. So that's really interesting. So we are always thinking along the lines of, well, the first piece of the puzzle, like you mentioned, is maybe visas, right? Immigration and legal, like being allowed to actually legally work in the country or employ people in the country. But you're saying there's also a financial component.
There is, yes. Yes.
And that varies between countries. Can you give us like a benchmark figure, or if you're coming from this country, you don't need to worry about it too much, but from here, if you're coming from here, it's a major consideration?
Um, it's kind of hard for me to go into those details because this kind of the taxation thing is transforming all the time. And I think it also depends on the company. So I think it's more of a question of the company's policy and then plus the country, right? Um, so I think between the US and Japan, in my experience, there has been a lot of noise or questions about the taxes issues, right?
They have a tax treaty in place, but I know that US citizens often complain about the fact that they're constantly being taxed even when they're not living there.
Yes. Yeah, there's that. Yeah.
Mm. Okay, so assuming, and you also mentioned budget. So is there like an entry point if a company contacts you and says we need to relocate staffers? Is there a minimum level in which you tell them, look, you'll have to spend at least this much per person, otherwise don't even worry about it because it's not going to be feasible?
Well, look, we have to take up inquiries, any inquiry, and we have to be able to respond professionally. Um, but you know, our it should we should clear it up that my current company, Momentum, we're mostly focused on shipping services, right?
Yep.
So the shipment of household goods. Um, Now we are able to handle the full package, the total package, and that's kind of that would be a different kind of process, right? But
Yeah, either yourselves or via outsource. I mean, that's how we got in contact. We want to use you guys for the shipping. You might want to use us for registration with various authorities. Like, I'm guessing there'll be pieces and contractors that you'd be utilizing for other things, right?
of course, right? But if it's like on an inquiry basis, and if it's only just for visa services, and it's just for a visa renewal, um, that's not a big transaction, is it? So, um, you know, but Ziv, it all depends, right? But I mean, I can give you an example about household goods services,
Yep.
where if it's we calculate based on our costs are based on the volume, right? So if it's somebody who only needs to ship a couple suitcases, it wouldn't make sense for them to use us because
Yeah.
they could use a courier service or they could use the post office, right? Um, but I think just to answer the question, I think they're really it's about every relocation and every client has different needs, right? So it's about what are the needs, And if it's visa services, we can probably accommodate. If it's house hunting services, we could take that to the next level. If it's shipping services, definitely. Especially if they're moving with a container, they're moving with a full household, right? But if they're just shipping a few suitcases, in that situation, we would defer them to somebody else who could do it.
Right. Okay, and then what's involved practically, logistically on the ground when somebody relocates? Let's put the money part aside for a moment.
Yeah.
What sort of services, like how many prongs do you then branch out to organize what? So you've mentioned shipping, which I'm assuming is a complex subject all on its own. But before we
Yes.
get into that, what other aspects or services or registrations or preparations do HR managers need to take into account if they've never done it before? What would be involved in a successful relocation? So tax, we've mentioned tax and visas and shipping, obviously.
Right. So you need to know about what the shipper's needs are and what's their situation. Do they have a family? You
In
need
the
to know
destination country, I mean.
in the destination country, are they going to take their family? What's their personality, right? Can they handle living in a big city like Tokyo, or should they be placed somewhere that's not so so crazy, somewhere like Yokohama or in a rural area or something like that. Um, you have to understand how long do they want to be uh, transferred, right? For how many years? Um, what kind of housing are they into? So this is all going to affect how much furniture they're going to ship, right? What they decide to ship. So the HR or whoever's involved, the project manager, really needs to do their research in those areas.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
And then once they land here, I know from our experience, we'll get into Japan specifically in a moment, but typical services that they need are house hunting, which you've mentioned. And once they found a place, obviously connecting to utilities, getting their own mobile phone connections, which is sometimes provided by the company, but sometimes not. If they're here with kids, they need to be registered for school. Obviously, everyone in the family needs to be registered for various other social services.
Yeah.
What else? What are we not? What are we or HR managers not thinking about except that?
Um, just to go back a second, I think that the HR or the planners for the relocation should be already engaging with the relocation experts before the assignee is in Japan, right? So they need to know what the options are, obviously in advance, right? And
Mm.
that's pretty standard. Some of the things that I don't think you mentioned were like like hospitals and things like that. Sometimes you have special needs um, members of the family or even the employees themselves, and these are things that they have to know where to go to, right?
That would also dictate where
Where
they might want to live, right?
Yes, it would dictate where they'd want to live, and there's financial considerations about that because most likely they don't speak Japanese, so they'll have to go to clinics or professionals that can they can speak English or even in some cases the language of their own country, right?
Mm. Okay, and with all of that in mind, how are you seeing things being more challenging or less challenging? I'd be surprised if that's the case in Japan specifically compared to other countries. So the language is obviously one of those things that's very challenging to find somebody who speaks English in any of these third-party provider offices or whatnot. What else have you been running into as uniquely Japanese challenges in that aspect?
Well, the language is a very big issue,
Mm.
but also in Japan, rules are rules, right? And for example, like the negotiation of and you know this yourself, like leases and when things have to start and when things have to finish. They're very fixed, right? In
Yeah.
Japan,
Yeah.
there's not a lot of flexibility, and I think the customers have to be mentally prepared for that before they come here, because it's a reality, right? Another thing is this is more on the shipping side of things, but the Japanese companies can be very firm when it comes to pricing and things like that, and they're not very flexible about pricing, right? So a quote in Japan is a very final quote, right?
Yeah.
If you want to add another box of socks or something, you're going to probably be charged for that.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of gray area in that place. Also, like in Japan, packers. This is from a packing perspective, but packers can be extremely efficient and very fast and very quick. But that doesn't necessarily mean they know the furniture that they're dealing with, right? Right. You know,
I can see
I've
some
had
horror
Italian.
stories coming up soon.
We don't have to go deep into the details, but I had an Italian customer once. He complained that the crew was actually too efficient. They put the thing together very quickly, but it wasn't the way it was supposed to be. I
Right.
didn't, they didn't have enough finesse with putting it back together. So
Okay.
um,
Oh, so they do the packing and then they also do the assembly at the new place.
exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay. Okay. So let's focus on shipping for a moment, which is your forte. What's involved in shipping an entire household? I mean, we're assuming somebody comes, packs it in a container, it ships it, but I'm guessing it's more complex than that, right?
Very much so. So, well, I mean, it all depends on how you look at it, but there are a lot of steps involved, right? And most people have very limited knowledge of how many steps there are involved, right? So, first and foremost, we have to understand what the shipper wants to ship, and this is usually done through a pre-move survey where the customer service representative usually visits the house, especially if it's for big moves and especially if they have a lot of furniture, nice furniture. Recently with technology, we can handle them virtually as well. As an industry veteran now, I can say that I would usually recommend visiting in person, especially if they have a lot of furniture. It's
Yeah.
also a good chance to meet the customer, right? So once this is accomplished, then we can recommend how exactly it's going to be shipped. And some people have air and sea shipments because their company has an allowance. Some people they don't have an air shipment, but they'll give them a 20-foot container. Some people have a 40-foot container. So this should probably be explained, but the most common types of containers in our industry are 20-foot container and a 40-foot. And there's also what's called a 40-foot high cube, which is it's a larger 40-foot container. It's 40-foot length, right? But the
Right.
height is a bit higher. So there's that. Then basically you have to understand what the timeline is for the shipment, right? Because a lot of customers, they don't have their housing set up yet in the destination country. And in that case, we'll have to store it, right?
Mm.
But then the question is do we store it in the host country, or do we store it in the country where we're packing up, or do we store it in the destination country? And these are things that the shipper has to consider, right? Because the price of storing it in the destination country might be more than what it costs to spend in the home country.
Is there any advantage
to that, to storing it in the destination country as opposed to the host country?
Well, they know that their shipment has arrived and cleared customs in in the destination country, so they can sit tight and they know that their shipment is is available. It is in fact available to be delivered
As soon
their
as they have a new place, right?
whenever they're ready.
Yeah.
That means they don't have to worry about shipping delays, which are quite common, right? So the storage might be this is completely hypothetical, but the storage might be a little bit cheaper in Japan, so they'll save money on the storage fees. But then once they give us the green lights to ship it out, there's no guarantee that it's going to arrive by the time that they really want it, right? Because shipping delays are they're not foreseeable. Yeah.
You must have had an even harder time now with the Ukrainian war going on. That put a bit of a damper on shipping routes and prices as well, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's Ukraine, but there's also the Middle Eastern situation, right?
Yeah.
And going through the Middle East is quite volatile, right?
Oh, right.
So
The Suez Canal was completely blocked off for a while with Houthi rebels and stuff, right?
there were in fact pirates, and there was there was some aggression. So most of the big shipping lines like Maersk and Hapag, they were rerouting the shipments across the Horn of Africa, right? So that adds potentially another month or so or more onto the shipping schedule, right?
And costs as well.
Well, if it's already at sea, then it's our costs are generally covered. But this is another thing that should be mentioned. The shipping companies, they rule the seas. So MSC, Maersk, Hapag, to name a few of the big ones, they basically they have authority to throw extra charges at us
Right.
for whatever reason, right? They also can route the shipments as they please. Sometimes after the departure, this has happened to me, where a shipment actually went into a completely different port, and luckily it was the same country, but the trucking of that shipment to where it was supposed to go would have been like 1,000 miles maybe. So pretty significant.
Mm. Is there any guidelines you can give? Now I'm talking about the people, not the HR managers, but any guidelines you can offer from your experience as to what's a good idea to maybe just not take with you and repurchase when you get to your destination? I mean, obviously, people are emotionally attached to their belongings, but are there things that you can obviously say, well, this would be a lot easier to just not ship and get a new one?
That's a really good question. And at the end of the day, it depends on how much the shipper is attached with what they have. But for example, IKEA, anything that's IKEA,
Don't worry about it.
you should you have to dispose it in Japan. This is something that a lot of HR, they don't, or whoever is controlling the budget, they don't consider, but it costs money to get rid of things in Japan.
You have to dispose of it? What do you mean?
Well, we would remove it, and we would take it somewhere, and we probably we'd have it recycled, or or something like that.
Why is that?
Well, I mean, because if it doesn't make any economical sense for them to ship it,
Right.
we would have it removed, right?
So you would what? You would go through the actual contents of the shipping container and just point out this goes, this we're gonna ship, this don't worry about it.
Well, we would do that before we load it, right?
Yeah.
This would be something that we would discuss during the pre-move survey, because if the shipper is on a tight budget, but they have 10 IKEA cabinets that it's maybe less than $500 or something like that.
Yeah.
It's cheaper for them to get rid of it
Yeah.
and buy new ones in the in the new country. Excuse me,
Unless they're emotionally attached to their IKEA cabinet, right?
which is usually not the case, though.
We would hope, yeah. Okay, can I ask you for some horror stories? It's very popular listening content, like some I don't know, some relocation or some shipping that went horribly wrong and how you had to deal with it. So you mentioned the Italian dude who didn't get the reassembly that he was hoping for.
Yeah, I mean, I can break that down into two different stories for you, maybe
Please.
maybe three if we have time. I can tell you that the first one is about the money, right?
Yeah.
It's usually about the money, and I had a shipper whose volume when I did the survey was almost certainly a 40-foot container. It was a lot of stuff. It was a significant shipment. And he was under the assumption that the company was going to pay for that, especially because that's what they gave him when he came to Japan. So this was somebody who was relocating back to the United States with the same company that he came with, by the way. So I guess I don't know why they decreased his allowance, because he wasn't retiring or anything like that, and he was an executive. But the company eventually decided that no, he's not going to have a 40-foot container. He's going to have a 20-foot container, which is, less than, it's about half of what he had, right?
Yeah.
And I did another survey, and I kind of told him that, well, you're actually still over the 20-foot container volume, so you have to prioritize. And I don't think that he quite understood how much he really had to prioritize,
Right.
because when we did the packing, it was still over a 20-foot container, and I had to call him every day. His packing still took 3 days, right? To be able to explain to him that he still has to part with some things. It was still a significant amount of stuff, right? So because he wasn't mentally prepared to get rid of that stuff,
Right.
and I don't think he understood how strict the volume restriction was. But that could have been just a little bit of a miscommunication, right? So
Would he
these
would
things
he have
have
been
to be.
able to pay for it himself if he wanted?
That's the story, though. He had to pay for it himself,
Right.
which he didn't want to do. But I can tell you that he was informed of this well in advance.
Mm.
But these things have to be made crystal clear, so everybody's on the same page. So that's, anyway. He did end up paying for the extra stuff, but we got rid of some of the stuff, so it wasn't an extraordinary extra cost. The other horror story is about how the items arrived when they came to Japan, and um, we have mold and mildew issues sometimes, right? And during COVID, I had a shipment that was stored in Singapore for much longer than it had to be, because his visa was up in the air, because he was moving from Singapore to Japan, and that process was taking way longer than it was supposed to. So we couldn't ship out his stuff without his visa being approved, right?
Yeah, I know the custom forms. Do you have unaccompanied luggage? And that's referring to your container, basically, right?
Yeah, but I mean, it's pretty standard that we don't ship it out if the visa isn't sorted out, because for whatever reason, if it's, they might say, oh yeah, it's going to be approved, but there's always a chance that it won't.
Yep.
And if the stuff's at sea and they don't have a visa, and then it comes into port and they still don't have a visa, we can't like just turn it around.
Yeah.
So then we'll have to figure out things from there. So anyway, this customer shipment, when it came to Japan, he had he had furniture and stuff, and a lot of the stuff had mold on it because it was in Singapore storage for a long time, and then eventually it was at sea, and I think it arrived in Japan in the summertime. Um, but his company didn't pay for air conditioned storage. Air conditioned storage is an option, and air conditioned storage can really mitigate the risk of at
Yeah.
least the mold and mildew spreading. Um, so anyway, so a lot of this stuff was moldy, and nobody likes that. So he did that was escalated. And I had another shipper who had a very nice couch which was moldy. Um, that can be cleaned, right? But generally, once you have mold in there, the can be in there forever, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's not easy to get rid of. I know that from home.
Right. So yeah, so I mean, in Japan, our previous place, it was the summertime was not a fun place to be. So the point of the story is there is the risk of mold and mildew damage, and we offer insurance protection to so the
Okay,
customer.
so that is available. Okay.
It is. It's usually an extra charge because if you have a lot of nice furniture and suits that are damaged, the claim value is going to be pretty significant.
Mm.
So we have an extension of the insurance coverage for mold and mildew. I'd like to get into the details of that, but I don't think we have time for that. So
That could be
so
a whole.
that is an option. But the other things that we advise the customer is just, especially if they have kids, if they have pets, is stuff gets wet, and not everybody is gonna have their eyeballs like X-rays and see everywhere where there is water and potential mold and mildew.
Of course.
But we just advise people just to make sure their stuff is clean. Go to the dry cleaners. Take a look at your kids' shoes and stuff because often the case is that's where the moisture comes from, and that
Right.
spreads. So that's horror story number two, and then the horror story number three is has to deal with the port of entry. And I can just tell everybody now that if you're going to Mexico, if you want to go through any of the West Coast ports, you need to have a legalized inventory, which has to be issued by the embassy, the Mexican embassy in the country where you are coming from. And there is an extra cost for that.
That sounds like something you learned the hard way.
Well, one of my shipments, it was already dispatched, and based on my understanding, it was supposed to go. Excuse me, it was supposed to go into Port of Veracruz, which is on the east side, and you don't have to have. I think most household good shipments are cleared through Veracruz.
Right.
West Coast ports like Manzanillo, Lázaro Cárdenas, most of that's like retail stuff, right? But anyway, obviously the western ports are a lot closer to Japan, right? So the transit time is about a month less, give or take. So I had a shipper who was adamant about going to the West Coast. So we had to get his legalized inventory, but he was already leaving Japan, so I had to go to the embassy and I had to do this for him. So I had a previous shipment where the shipment had already been dispatched, and the paperwork wasn't in Japan. So the shipper had to DHL the paperwork to Japan, and then we had to go to the embassy. But that's just an additional cost, right? So
it kind of sounds like all of these tougher situations you're describing kind of sound like you mentioned before, like lack of communication between the shipper and their employer. I mean, please be aware of how much we're actually allocating for your shipping allowance. Please be aware that we will not be paying for air-conditioned containers. Please be aware that you need to fill in these forms in advance and prepare. It sounds like lack of communication I mean, better communication can prevent most of these, right?
Right. And this is why every corporate that has a lot of international transfers, they have to have a relocation advisor. Whether it's an in-house person, which in some cases they do hire people in-house, some Japanese companies do have HR people who handle this stuff, or if it's outsourced to an expert,
Especially if it's their first time, right?
especially if it's the first. If they have no experience, they need to have an expert.
Yeah. That's some
Because these
very
are all
good advice.
variables. Sorry to interrupt you, but these are all variables um, that people don't consider. And some people consider, but maybe the HR person doesn't consider, or maybe it's vice versa, right?
Right. So do you provide them with this information ahead of submitting a quote? Like, do you say, okay, you can skip this, and that, but please be aware that might happen?
Absolutely.
And they still don't listen?
We no, we give out a lot of information, and we highlight things in red and in bold print, and we don't want to treat the customers like kids though, but we try to make it, so it's hard to miss, right? And still people miss it. But and everything has to be in writing, and everything has to be in email. You can't just let's talk on WhatsApp and let me get your commitment on the phone. No, it has to be in an email.
Yeah.
And all of the stakeholders have to be CC'd. But to answer your question, we do provide the information.
Right. Right. Okay. So what else can you tell me that people should be aware of? Let's leave the companies for a moment. Let's go to the actual shippers. I don't know what's the industry term, the people who are actually relocating.
We call them the shipper, yeah.
The shipper. What should they be aware of as they're planning to start packing and relocating their entire life belongings to another country? What should they be thinking about in preparation?
Man, I think we touched on that a little bit, but a big thing that has to be considered is where's the stuff going to go, and what's the housing going to be like, and how does the stuff fit into the new residence.
That's a very good point, because a lot
I
of them
can
have
tell
never
you,
seen the place in person before they relocate, right?
and people that have big furniture, if it doesn't fit in the elevator, it has to be hoisted with ropes,
Yeah.
or you have to get a crane sometimes. I had a customer who was shipping a shrine, like a real like a small shrine, right? But it was heavy, right? It was made of stone. We had to use a crane to get that out. Okay, and then you have to go to the police, or whoever's monitoring the streets, right? Because if we park a train, sorry, not a train, if we park a crane on a very narrow hill, which you're familiar with in Japan,
Yeah.
nobody's going to get through that.
No.
Somebody who's on a grand mal bicycle is not going to get through.
No.
So you have to get the permits for that too, and that's an additional cost. Let's take the conversation to Europe, where the streets are also narrow, but the buildings are very old.
Mm.
France, Italy, elevator is not going to be there in some cases.
Yeah.
And even places that have an elevator, let's take it to New York. They charge you if you want to use the elevator. Right? So it's all these little, these little considerations. If you have a house in the United States and it's not in a congested area, most of the time the container itself is brought up to your driveway, and they'll just unpack it off of the container.
Right.
And this also happens in Australia, right? But in Japan, no. In Europe, no. In places like New York, Toronto, Boston, no.
No, or added expenses.
it's all added expenses, and it's usually not included in the standard quote. So this is what we discuss though in advance, because we have to give them the base of how we ship it from A to B, point A to B, but also what we call the accessorial charges, which are like how many trucks do we need? Can we use the elevator? Are we going to take a grand piano up 7 flights of stairs or something like that?
Yeah.
Um,
Have you had situations where somebody just didn't recognize that the space they're moving into is a lot smaller than the space they're relocating from, and then they couldn't even fit all of their stuff in the new place? Does that ever happen? Or
it's happened in Japan, and a lot of people just put their stuff into storage.
because the layouts are a lot smaller here, generally speaking, right?
Exactly. So I've encountered many people. This is actually, they were not our customers when they came to Japan. So I don't know. I think maybe their expectations weren't
Who
correct.
made the call?
So but a lot of people they can't fit it in the main house, so they either put it in their basement, sorry, in their garage, I should say, not their basement, because basements aren't so common here.
No, we don't have those.
In the garage, or the storage room, the sulco in the house, or they actually pay for a storage unit, and in some cases it's more than one unit.
Yeah.
And they have to pay that monthly, right? So that's another bill to worry about.
Right, which I guess the company would not pay for. That'll have to be their private expense, right?
90% of the time they don't cover that.
Yeah.
Sometimes the company does cover storage, but it's usually capped. It's like a small. We usually work in cubic meters, and it's usually a very small number of cubic meters.
Right.
But if it's like the whole household, and it's going to be stored for 2 to 3 years, I think most companies would have to say, yeah, well, you're going to have to at least cover some of that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, that was very eye-opening. Thank you. I guess to before I let you go, it's something that I ask a lot of people that I interview is we've talked about all of the challenges, obviously, which is what these recordings are usually about. But what do you like about your job? Like, what do you feel, if you do, that you're accomplishing and that you're happy to go back into every day?
I mean, I can answer that question very quickly. Is you get to know people, actually. You get to know their personalities, and you get to know what they're concerned about. And actually, a lot of times the little things have big meaning, right? Like their furniture, right? Or the timeline of where they're going to live. You really get to know the customer, and you also you really want to, because you get to know them, you really want to provide them with top-notch service, right? Because I'm aware of the costs, right? And if true customer service is you really want to advise the customer the best way, right? And so advising them about how to save money and everything like that, that goes a long way. So yeah,
it's the people for you.
Yeah, it is the people, and we move a lot of different people in a lot of different industries. So I mean, I move people who are executives, right, at very big organizations, but we also move school teachers and students as well sometimes. But every relocation is different, and if you have a proper conversation about the relocation, the customer is going to get a lot out of that, right? Especially if they're smart, and they might even should take notes, right? Because there's so much that goes into it, as you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, just giving them some guidance there's a lot of satisfaction in that. It's like counseling. It's like advisory services. It's not just about the transaction itself.
I think one of the not to we didn't plan this in advance, but one of the advantages that I feel Momentum has, or at least of my conversations with you to date, is that as opposed to a lot of the Japanese companies that we deal with, you're actually doing a lot to try and provide a customized service to suit, like you've mentioned, every location is different. So rather than have a menu which says, okay, you have to take this, this, and that, and those are only options, you do try to custom tailor-made solutions for people based on their circumstances, right?
Exactly. And this is a big issue with a lot of people I come across because sometimes the companies are rigid. And for example, beyond the moving companies, there sometimes is what we call an RMC, a relocation management company.
Mm.
And I'm gonna try not to badmouth them, but a lot of the policies that they have and the pricing is pretty fixed, and there's not a lot of wiggle room out of that, right?
Yeah.
We're about, we don't we don't really like to give people a menu or a policy that they have to stick by, right? We're like you said, we're a very flexible company. We're not a huge company, as you know, but we all have a lot of experience in the industry. So that gives us a very kind of a bespoke quality, right?
I
Or a
think so.
customizable quality.
Bespoke or
And that,
concierge approach is what makes us stand out too, and I'm not shying away from it.
and I know we'll have to leave soon, but I'll give you an example. Is there was a customer who we ended up not getting, and it went. He used a larger Japanese company. This was more because of scheduling, of a scheduling issue. But look, I still gave him like what would be like our recommendation, our solution to his shipment, even after I knew that we lost it, actually. Because I think him taking that with giving him another perspective, right, it would be very valuable to him.
And reputation wise,
Reputation, and he
market.
went on. He wrote us a very nice review, even though we didn't use us, but he wrote us a very nice review.
Yeah. I think it's a big thing, especially in Japan, where, like you mentioned earlier, then rigidity is a big thing, right? Like, this is how we do things, and you either take our services with everything entailed and nothing else, or you don't. So that's a big thing, I think, especially when dealing with multinationals like you do.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. And yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very, very much for your time. This was super useful and educational, and I'm hoping we'll number one, have you back on with some updates and hopefully some growth stories, but also hopefully have a chance to work together, which is what we've been trying to do for a while.
Yeah, that would be wonderful, and I look forward to it.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Dave.
So there you have it. Huge thanks to Jeremy, who provided all of those insights. Feel free to connect with him on LinkedIn. We'll link to his profile in this episode's show notes. Hope you found some value in this episode. Now, if you found value in this podcast, we'd really love it if you could like, subscribe, and even better, share the episode with anyone in your network who might also find value in it. And of course, leave us a review or a comment wherever you might have found this podcast. Your word of mouth is our oxygen, and it helps us reach more and more and more people who might find value in the topics that we cover here. We love hearing from you. And of course, if you want to be on the podcast, either as a sponsor, we can definitely put you in the ears of anyone interested in moving to Japan, or even better, as a guest, either via recorded conversation or just send in your questions, audio, video, written form. We'll try to give you the answers you're looking for. Just drop us a line here in the comment section or via DM or on email, info@nipponbridge.com. That's info, info@NIPPON, nipponbridge.com. All one word. We want to know what you think. Hope to have you with us again next time. And until then, have a great day or night ahead. Yoroshiku.